Russia built the Tu-44 Giatsint-K for exactly one job: fire a few 152 shells from 30 kilometers out, then run before anyone can answer. The whole design is an argument that speed beats accuracy. On 3 August 2026, on the Kupiansk axis in Kharkiv Oblast, a Ukrainian drone crew tested that argument and it failed. The gun fired. The gun ran. The drone was already moving with it. What burned on that dirt track was one of only a handful Russia has ever fielded, and the second one confirmed destroyed in this entire war. How a crew catches a truck that is already accelerating is the whole story. The unit was Ukraine's 151st Mechanized Brigade. The date, 3 August 2026. The place, the Kupiansk direction in Kharkiv Oblast in the northeast, where the front has been grinding back and forth across the Oskil River Valley for more than 2 years. Multiple outlets confirmed the loss within days, and the assessment was consistent across all of them. Second confirmed Tu-44 destroyed since February 2022. Not the second this month, not the second this year, the second ever. That number is the reason this strike matters more than the vehicle itself. Ukraine has destroyed thousands of Russian artillery pieces. Old towed guns, Soviet-era self-propelled howitzers, mortar carriers hauled out of storage depots in the Urals and shipped west with rust still on the barrels. Those are replaceable. Russia has decades of stockpile to burn through, and it has been burning through it. The Giatsint-K is a different animal. It is new production, it is small production, and open-source reporting puts the planned run for 2026 at roughly 36 units for the entire year. An analyst estimate from tracking Russian industry, not an official Russian figure. But even as an estimate, the math is brutal. 36 planned, 2 confirmed gone, one of them on a dirt track outside Kupiansk on a summer afternoon. Start with what the thing actually is, because the design tells you exactly how its crew was thinking when they died. The Tu-44 Giatsint-K is a wheeled, self-propelled gun. That phrase does a lot of work, so unpack it. Most artillery Russia uses in Ukraine sits on tracks. The Tu-19 Stas, the Tu-3 Akatsia, vehicles that look like tanks with oversized guns. Tracks give you cross-country mobility. They also give you a top road speed of around 60 kilometers per hour on a good day, high fuel consumption, and a maintenance burden that eats crews alive. The Giatsint-K throws all of that out. It puts the gun on a BAZ 6010-027 chassis, a 4-axle, 8-wheel drive heavy truck built for hauling missile systems. 8 wheels, road speed well above what a tracked howitzer can manage, and the ability to be on the move within a minute of the last round leaving the barrel. The gun itself is not new at all. It is the Tu-A36 Giatsint-B, a towed 152 piece the Soviet Union put into service in the mid-1970s. Long barrel, high muzzle velocity, and genuinely long reach. With standard high-explosive fragmentation shells, it throws out to roughly 35 kilometers. With rocket-assisted projectiles, roughly 33. Those are serious numbers. They put Ukrainian supply roads, command posts, and assembly areas inside the envelope from positions that sit comfortably behind Russia's own front line. So the concept is a Soviet barrel bolted onto a modern truck. Old lethality, new legs, and the legs are the entire point. The tactic it exists to enable is called shoot-and-scoot. It works like this. The gun rolls into a firing position it has never used before and will never use again. It stops. Hydraulic spades drop at the rear to absorb recoil. The crew lays the gun on a target they were fed by a drone or a forward observer minutes earlier. They fire 3, 4, maybe 6 rounds. Then the spades come up, the truck rolls, and within 60 to 90 seconds of the last shot, the position is empty. When Ukrainian counter-battery radar tracks the shell arc back to the launch point and Ukrainian guns put steel on that grid square, they hit a patch of churned dirt and nothing else. That is not a bad idea. Against counter-battery artillery, it works. Radar detection, target processing, fire mission tasking, rounds in flight, that chain takes minutes even when it runs perfectly. A truck that is already accelerating down a tree-line road will not be there when the response arrives. The problem is that the Giatsint-K was designed for a war against counter-battery artillery. It is fighting a war against drones. Understand what that changes, because it is not a small adjustment. Counter-battery fire is reactive and blind. It responds to something that already happened at a coordinate calculated from a shell trajectory, with weapons that cannot correct once fired. A drone is none of those things. A drone is a human being with eyes sitting in a dugout 8 kilometers away watching a live video feed. The drone does not calculate where the vehicle was. It watches where the vehicle is going, and it can change its mind mid-flight. Against that, running away is not a defense. Running away is just moving while being watched. The 151st Mechanized Brigade operates on the Kupiansk axis, and that piece of ground shapes everything about how this strike happened. Kupiansk sits on the Oskol River in Kharkiv Oblast. It was occupied in the first days of the full-scale invasion, liberated in September 2022 during the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and has been under Russian pressure almost continuously ever since. Russia wants it because it is a rail junction. Rail junctions move ammunition, and ammunition is what an offensive actually runs on. Ukraine holds it because losing it would open the road toward Kharkiv from the east. The terrain there is not the flat, open steppe of Zaporizhzhia. It is broken country, river valleys, wooded belts, farm tracks running between fields, small villages every few kilometers. That geography is why Russian artillery on this axis leans hard on concealment and displacement. There are a lot of tree lines to hide a truck under. There are a lot of dirt roads to leave by. It is also why the drone units on this axis have gotten very, very good at pattern recognition. Here is the part that never appears in the footage, and it is the part that decides the outcome before anyone launches anything. A drone crew hunting artillery does not go looking for artillery, they go looking for behavior. Artillery has a signature that has nothing to do with what the vehicle looks like. It fires at certain times. It uses certain approach roads. It parks in certain kinds of cover. It comes back not to the same spot because crews are trained not to, but to the same general area because the geometry of the front dictates where a 30-kilometer gun has to sit to reach what it is being asked to reach. That last point is worth sitting with. A gun with a 5-kilometer reach cannot be anywhere it likes. It has to be inside 5 kilometers of its targets, and it has to be behind enough Russian-held ground to survive. Those two constraints define a band of terrain, and in that band there are only so many roads solid enough to carry a 40-ton 8-wheeled truck, and only so many places with overhead cover big enough to hide it. The crew thinks they are choosing a new position every time. In practice, the map is choosing for them. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones fly that band constantly. Not FPV strike drones, different aircraft, different job. Reconnaissance quadcopters loiter at altitude, sometimes for hours, mapping tracks, noting fresh ruts in field roads, watching which tree lines have vehicles reversing into them at dusk. Every pass builds the picture. Nothing happens for days, then something does. An FPV crew does not stumble across a firing self-propelled gun by accident. 20-minute battery life does not permit stumbling. When an FPV goes up, someone already knows what it is going after and roughly where. Which means the preparation was in place long before the aircraft left the ground. The Russian side of this had its own logic, and it is worth stating plainly rather than mocking, because understanding the miscalculation is more useful than sneering at it. The battery commander operating that Giatsint-K had a genuinely valuable asset and knew it. New equipment, tiny production numbers, a barrel that outranges most of what Ukraine can put opposite him. His doctrine told him the threat was counter-battery fire, and his vehicle was purpose-built to beat counter-battery fire. Fire fast, move fast, live. That doctrine came out of a Soviet artillery tradition built across decades of thinking about how to survive against NATO gun batteries. What that doctrine does not have a good answer for is a $500 aircraft flown by a 19-year-old with a video headset who can see him leaving. There is a second layer to the Russian miscalculation, and it is about the vehicle rather than the tactic. Putting a howitzer on a wheeled truck buys you speed. It costs you protection. A tracked self-propelled gun carries an armored hull, thin by tank standards, but real steel around the crew and the ammunition. The BAZ 6010-027 chassis carries a truck cab. Some variants add limited armor to the crew compartment, but nothing on that vehicle is built to survive a shaped charge or fragmentation warhead delivered directly into the cab, the engine bay, or the ready ammunition. Wheels are worse. A tracked vehicle can lose road wheels and keep running on the track. An 8x8 truck that loses tires and a hydraulic line is a stationary object with a large gun on it. So the Giatsint-K survival model is entirely behavioral. Nothing about its construction protects it. Only its movement does. That is a fine bet in a war where the threat is slower than you are. It is a terrible bet in a war where the threat has a camera and a throttle. On 3 August 2026, that bet came due. The engagement itself follows a pattern that Ukrainian FPV crews on the Kupiansk axis have refined over 2 years, and the released footage shows it clearly. The gun is in a firing position. It fires, and then it does exactly what it was designed to do. It starts to leave. Take the strike from the operator's side, because that is where the decisions lie. An FPV quadcopter is not an autonomous weapon. It is a human being flying a small aircraft through a video link, with roughly 15 to 20 minutes of battery and no way to land and try again once committed. The operator sits in a dugout or a tree-lined position, sometimes several kilometers back watching a screen. A second crew member handles the video relay and the antenna. A third calls the target. It is a team sport with very short timelines. The launch decision is the hardest part of the whole cycle, and it is entirely about arithmetic. The drone flies at somewhere between 60 and 120 kilometers per hour, depending on the airframe and how hard the operator pushes it. The battery gives you a fixed number of minutes. Every kilometer of standoff eats into the time available to search, identify, correct, and strike. Launch too early and you are loitering over the target area burning battery while the gun is still driving to its firing point. Launch too late and it is gone, which means the crew was not reacting to the sound of the gun firing. They were positioned in advance, launched in a window they had chosen, and were already airborne and pointed at the right patch of ground when the rounds went out. The aircraft is a quadcopter, not a fixed-wing. The category is readable from the engagement itself. This is a front-line strike on a moving vehicle a short distance behind the contact line. Fixed-wing FPVs with internal combustion engines are deep-strike weapons, 50 to 100 kilometers and beyond, flown against airfields, refineries, and fixed installations. They are fast, but they turn like aircraft, which is to say badly. You do not chase a maneuvering truck down a farm track with a fixed-wing platform. You do it with a quadcopter, which can pivot on its own axis, drop, climb, and match a ground vehicle turn for turn. Watch what the footage shows and think about it as a geometry problem. The gun fires. Recoil rocks the chassis. The spades come up. The truck begins to roll, and it accelerates faster than a tracked vehicle can, exactly as advertised. 8 driven wheels pulling 40-odd tons up to speed on a farm road. Dust comes off the tires in a long trailing cloud. To a counter-battery radar operator, this vehicle has already won. To the operator watching it on a video feed, it has just made itself the easiest thing on the battlefield to find. That dust plume is the detail that decides it. A stationary vehicle under a tree line is genuinely hard to see from a small camera at low altitude, camouflage netting, cut branches, shadow, and a background of the same colors. A moving vehicle throws a signature you can follow from kilometers out. Every meter the Giatsint-K covers at speed is a meter of advertising. The operator does not fly at where the truck is. That is the mistake a beginner makes, and it produces a stern chase you never win. The operator flies at where the truck is going to be. A vehicle on a farm track has almost no freedom. It cannot cut across a plowed field at speed without bogging. It cannot reverse. It is committed to the road. So the drone takes a diagonal, cutting the corner, trading closure rate for angle. The last seconds are the ones that separate a trained crew from an untrained one. Closing on a moving vehicle, the image on the screen goes from a small shape in a wide frame to filling the entire display in under 3 seconds. The operator has to pick an aim point in that window and hold it while the target is still moving underneath the crosshair. Not the vehicle, a point on the vehicle, cab, engine bay, or the ammunition stowage behind the crew compartment. Then there is no more steering, only commitment, and the feed goes to static. The vehicle burned. What the footage shows is a destroyed Tu-44 Giatsint-K on the Kupiansk axis, credited to the 151st Mechanized Brigade on 3 August 2026. What happens after a hit like this is worth describing, because a 152mm gun does not simply stop working. It comes apart. A self-propelled gun in a firing position carries ready ammunition. Propellant charges, fuses, high-explosive shells. When a warhead goes into that space, the vehicle does not just burn, it dismantles itself over the following minutes as charges cook off. Hatches blow open. The barrel, which is a precision-machined length of steel, worth a substantial fraction of the whole system's value, warps in the heat and becomes scrap. Hydraulics feeding the spades and the elevation gear burst and feed the fire. Tires burn with the thick black smoke that makes these strikes so easy to geolocate afterward, because a column of tire smoke on open ground is visible for kilometers and shows up clearly on the reconnaissance feed that stays overhead to confirm the result. That confirmation flight matters more than the strike footage. Ukrainian units do not claim a destroyed vehicle off an FPV feed that cuts to static. Static only proves the drone stopped transmitting. Confirmation comes from a second aircraft loitering afterward, imaging the wreck, and from open-source analysts who geolocate the footage against terrain and satellite imagery and add the loss to running visual confirmation databases. That process is why the phrase "second confirmed loss" carries weight. It is not a Ukrainian claim. It is a photographic record cross-checked by people who reject claims for a living, and the recovery question answers itself. A tracked vehicle with a damaged running gear can sometimes be towed back, repaired at a depot, returned to a battery in weeks. This vehicle burned to the frame on open ground inside FPV range on an axis where Ukrainian drones fly constantly. Any Russian recovery vehicle sent to hook it up becomes the next target, and every crew on that front knows it. The wreck stayed where it stopped. Now the Arithmetic, which is where this strike stops being a single burning truck and starts being a problem for Russian artillery planning. Russia is not short of guns in the aggregate. It is short of guns that work well. 3.5 years of high-intensity fire missions have destroyed barrels at a rate the country's manufacturing base cannot match, not just from Ukrainian strikes, but from where? Because a 152 barrel has a finite number of full-charge rounds in it before accuracy degrades past usefulness. Storage-based vehicles pulled out to replace losses are older, in worse condition, and shorter range than what they replace. The trend line across the war runs one direction. Russian artillery is getting older and less capable per tube, while Ukrainian drone and counter-battery capability improves. The Giatsint-K was supposed to be a partial answer. Long-reach modern mobility, a system that could operate from further back and survive by moving. If open-source estimates of roughly 36 units planned across all of 2026 are close to right, then this is a program producing about 3 vehicles a month for a front line more than 1,000 kilometers long. That is not a fleet. That is a boutique run. Against that production rate, a single FPV strike is not a rounding error. It is a measurable fraction of an entire year's output, removed by an aircraft that costs less than a used motorcycle. And it removes it permanently. The vehicle is not damaged, it is scrap. There is a second cost that never appears in a lost database. Crews. Operating a wheeled self-propelled gun in a Shutan scoot cycle demands a trained team who can lay, fire, and displace under pressure without fumbling any step. On a system that has been in service a very short time in tiny numbers, that experience exists in a handful of crews across the entire Russian army. Vehicles can be built slowly. The crews who know that specific vehicle are harder to replace than the vehicle. Another gun crew removed from Russia's order of battle, and there were never many to begin with. The third cost is behavioral, and over months it is the largest of the 3. Russian battery commanders on the Kupiansk axis now have documentary evidence that displacement does not save them from drones. The response is predictable because it is what every Russian artillery unit under drone pressure has done. Fire from further back, fire fewer rounds, spend more time under cover, refuse missions into areas known to be drone-saturated. Each of those adjustments costs accuracy or volume or responsiveness. A gun that fires from maximum range has a larger dispersion pattern. A gun that fires 2 rounds instead of 6 delivers less onto the target. A gun that will not move in daylight cannot support an assault that happens in daylight. Russian infantry going forward on that axis gets thinner fire support later from further away, and thinner fire support is the difference between an assault that reaches a tree line and one that stalls in the open. That is the real yield of a strike like this. The burning truck is the visible part. The invisible part is every other Giatsint-K commander on the front reading the report and deciding to fire from 3 kilometers further back tomorrow. Which brings the story back to the question the whole vehicle was built to answer. Russia's design bureau looked at the artillery war and concluded the threat was counter-battery fire, so they built a gun that outruns counter-battery fire. That conclusion was correct in 2018. It is obsolete in 2026, and the reason is that the fundamental relationship between the shooter and the target changed. Counter-battery fire is a race. You shoot, they calculate, you leave before the answer lands. Speed wins races. Drones do not race. A drone is already in the air before the gun fires. It watches, it follows, it closes on a diagonal. There is no starting gun, so there is nothing to outrun. The Tu-44's entire survival concept assumed a clock that no longer exists. 60 seconds from last round to rolling was the winning number against radar-cued guns. Against an FPV crew already airborne and holding on the target area, 60 seconds is just 60 seconds of driving in a straight line under observation. Russia will keep building them, roughly 3 a month. If the open source figure holds, rolling west to a front where the survival concept they were designed around does not apply. Some will do useful work, the barrel is genuinely long-ranged and the mobility is genuinely real, and against a less drone-dense sector the shoot-and-scoot cycle still functions. But every one of them arrives carrying the same flaw, and the flaw is not in the steel. It is in the assumption underneath the steel. 2 down out of a program measured in dozens. On 3 August 2026, on a farm track on the Kupiansk axis, a crew of the 151st Mechanized Brigade proved that Russia's newest gun cannot outrun the cheapest weapon on the battlefield. The gun did exactly what it was built to do. It fired and it ran hard. It was not built fast enough because nothing on wheels is fast enough when the thing chasing it flies. And the man flying it decided where that truck would stop before the driver ever touched the accelerator.